Good evening, everyone. Everyone, before we begin our program tonight, we want to thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and allow our language interpreters to introduce themselves and welcome you. We'll begin with our ASL interpreter, Anthony Bizzaro. Thank you. Do we have Don Zupelli on the line? Okay. Alexander Krim, Alejandro Herrera, and Elizabeth Deesh. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us for the Tempo Town Hall, NYCHA's new lead safety program. We are so glad that you can join us. The Town Hall will begin with a presentation by Dwayne Jolly from the New York City Department of Health, who will provide an overview of lead poisoning prevention.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And again, my name is Dwayne Jolly from the Department of Health, the Education and Community Partnerships Unit within the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. So what I'm going to talk about today is just to give you some background on lead poisoning prevention, a brief background, and so make sure everyone's on the same page of what lead is, as well as give you some basic steps that you could take to protect your families and yourself from lead poisoning and lead paint hazards. And at the end of my brief presentation, I'll give you some resources for your family there. So we want to first start out just to defining what lead is. And lead basically is a metal that's found in nature. It's used in industry because of its properties. So it's easy to use, it's soft, malleable, where it could easily be shaped into different sizes, but yet it's durable. It has a low melting point. And it's easy for welding. That's why they will use lead as lead solderers for joining pipes. Some common uses are paint, pipes with plumbing, car batteries, ammunitions like in the form of bullets, color pigments. And the reason why they will use lead for color pigments is that the lead helps to bind the paint to that particular surface, as well as make the color stand out. And it's also used in glazes. And some products, we're talking about imported products from other countries, can contain lead. Some products, as in foods, jewelry, toys, and cosmetics, and pottery. And again, we're talking about imported products, not necessarily products that you're buying in your local stores, but products that people are bringing in from other countries, whether they go to their home countries, they bring it up in their suitcase. But with all these properties, the bottom line, lead is poisonous, right? And it could get into your body two main ways, right? Lead can enter the body by you eating, swallowing, or mouthing a lead-containing product. You could put your hands in your mouth after you touch a product that contain lead. And also you could breathe in lead dust or fumes during the renovation, repairs, and demolitions that disturb lead-based paint. Now, there are health effects to lead. In children, it could do damage to their brain and nervous system. Also, it could cause learning and behavioral problems such as lowering the IQ or cause like hyperactivity. In pregnant women, it could cause miscarriage, premature labor, high blood pressure, brain damage, and developmental delays to the fetus. In adults, in general, it could cause brain and nervous system disorder, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and kidney damage, and reproductive health effects, like making someone sterile. Now, with all these health effects, you have to keep in mind that you may not always feel or look sick when lead poison. So the only way to know for certain is to get a blood lead test, right? So we talk a little bit about blood lead screening requirements. Now, in children, there's a New York State law that requires that the healthcare provider test all children at age 1 and 2 for lead. And the children should be assessed for lead exposure by their doctor every year until they are 6 years of age. So after age 2, it's not a mandatory test that's going to be given, but the doctor should be asking the caregivers or the parent questions related to possible lead exposure, like do you live in a home that has peeling paint? You know, does your child has hand-to-mouth activity? Do they like to put non-food items in their mouth? And several other questions. And if the parent answers yes to any of these questions, then they will go ahead and test. So even if a child is 5 years old, if they answer yes to those questions, they will test. Now, pregnant women, the doctors will ask pregnant women risk assessment questions around lead exposure during their first prenatal visit. And for workers at risk for lead poisoning because of their job should be monitored by the employer. Now, when we talk about workers, we're talking about, people who work in a profession that will expose them to lead, like a construction worker, a painter, someone that does lead abatement. Those are the type of workers that are at risk for lead exposure. Now, children are the ones that are most at risk. Even though we talked about pregnant women and adults, but children are the ones that are most at risk. And the reason why they're most at risk is that they're still growing and developing. So lead will disrupt their growth and development, and also children's behavior, right? Young children at risk due to their mouthing behavior, especially a child like say 2-3 years of age. They explore the world through putting things in their mouth. So the peeling paint and the dust that's created becomes more of a problem than anything else. And it's one of the most commonly identified source of lead exposure for children in New York City. So what will happen, as you see there in the picture, that wall is flaking off, peeling off, and then eventually what will happen is that paint will turn into dust, and if it's lead paint, it turns into lead dust, and then that dust will land on the floor. It will land on toys that are maybe laying on the floor, and then the child does what's natural, puts the toy in the mouth that has the lead dust, and now they're ingesting the lead into their system. So that's one of the most common identified sources of lead exposures is that lead dust. Now, what can you do to protect your family regarding lead exposure? Well, you want to keep it clean, right? We've mentioned about the dust. So one of the ways that you could protect your child is to wash your floors, your windowsills often, as well as toys in children's hands often, right? Using a wet method, it's helpful. And then removing your shoes before entering your home because you could drag in debris and that debris may contain lead. So it's a good practice to remove your shoes before entering your home and then work safely. So if you're one of those do-it-yourselfers, you're putting up some shelving and you're screwing, or nailing, nails in the wall, and it's creating dust, you want to use the wet method, as we mentioned, make sure that you clean up any debris that came from that wall. So you want to keep it out by keeping the children away from the peeling and damaged paint, and home repairs that disturb lead-based paint. And also keep it out by avoid using products that may contain lead. We mentioned that there could be jewelry, toys, certain home remedies. I will provide you with a link, a web address where you could find out more information about some of the imported products that may contain lead. And then also, by keeping it out, you should use only cold tap water for drinking and cooking and making baby formula, and run the water for about 30 seconds before using it until it's noticeably colder. Now, the reason why we mention about using cold water because the hot water will dissolve more quickly lead into the water than the cold water. So we recommend use cold water. So use the cold water, then heat it up. Now, and keep in mind, boiling water does not get rid of lead, okay? Because it's a metal, you're not going to get rid of lead by boiling the water. Now, you want to speak up. As residents speak up, you can report peeling and damaged paint to NYCHA Customer Contact Center. You want to remind your doctor to test your child for lead poisoning at age 1 and 2, right? 'Cause sometimes children get tested and they're not tested at both ages. So if you know you have a 3-year-old and they never got tested at 2, just remind the doctor in your next visit that could you please have a lead test done. And then also, if you or your family members are at risk for lead poisoning, ask the doctor for a blood lead test, because that's the only way you're going to know for certain. Okay, so these are some simple steps you could take to protect your family, but it goes a long way in reducing any potential lead exposure. And here, I want to leave you with some resources. So for more information about lead poisoning prevention, you could call our information line at 646-632-6023. Just leave a message. We're not there in the office yet. By next month, we will be, but we check the line throughout the day. So just leave a message. Somebody will get back in touch with you. So if you have questions, general questions on lead poisoning, please give us a call. And you could visit the New York City Health Department site on lead at nyc.gov/lead. And before I mentioned about products, to find out about some of these products that contain lead, you could also go to the nyc.gov hazardous products site to learn more about lead sources. And if any of you out there in the audience are part of a organization, community-based organization, maybe a church group, and you'd like us to come out, do a presentation, a virtual presentation for now, or just receive some education material, we will mail it to you, the hard copies, by contacting us at healthyhomesecp@health.nyc.gov, or you could call again our information line at that 646-632-6023. And I mentioned about tips. I gave you some tips about running the water for 30 seconds if you think there's potential lead there. But if you're still concerned, call 311 for a free drinking water lead test kit. They will mail you a kit out to you, and you could fill up the container, send it back to the Department of Environmental Protection. They'll let you know the results, and they'll take it from there. And then lastly, for some blood lead screening resources, call 311 to find a provider, or if you have no insurance, it's call 311. And I want to leave you also with the Health and Hospital lead test appointment line for children. And that number is 347-507-3684. And lastly, here is a picture of one of our brochures. Like I mentioned, you could download these PDFs, or we could mail by calling us or emailing us. We can mail you out some literature on lead poisoning for your group. So with that said, and I'm going to be here for the end, so we'll take questions at the end. So Michelle, we can move on to the next presenter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jolly.
You're welcome.
At this time, we will have a presentation by Dan Green, NYCHA's Chief Compliance Officer, who will be providing an overview of the new Tempo Lead Safety Program. After the presentation, we will host a Q&A portion where you can ask any remaining questions that you may have, any participants on the line. And this will be done in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Thank you again, Mr. Jolly. Please welcome Dan Green.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Green. I'm NYCHA's Chief Compliance Officer, and I'm here today to talk about a new program which we're calling Tempo, which will hopefully start to change the story about NYCHA and lead. And I want to begin tonight by acknowledging that it is a very sad and difficult story, especially those of you who've been following the news for the past few years. Fully acknowledge that NYCHA needed to do a lot better and did actually a poor job in some areas on lead-based paint. And We signed an agreement with the federal government 2 years ago to try to change that. And as part of that change, one of the things that we have to do are projects called action plans, to come up with ways that we're going to right the wrongs of the past and that we're going to start to turn the corner and get rid of problems such as lead from our developments permanently. The TEMPO program is the first step in what will be a long journey to achieve that goal, but it's a very important one. And if you get anything from the presentation tonight, what I want you to get from it is that this program is about protecting kids who are younger than 6 years of age, so 5 years old and younger, because those are the kids who are most susceptible to the many problems that Dwayne just described in his presentation. And so the name of the program is TEMPO. It stands for the Team for Enhanced Management, Planning, and Outreach. All three of those things, management, planning, and outreach, are things that we need to do better on lead. And so tonight we're going to talk about how we're going to do that. So let's get to the next slide. Okay, so again, TEMPO's sole mission is to protect kids from the harm of lead poisoning. And we're going to have 5 strategies to achieve this. First, TEMPO is the first step where we're going to be abating lead proactively in our apartments. And we're going to talk about the apartments that we're going to be starting with as part of the TEMPO program. Second, we need to make sure that when we're doing the type of construction work that was described in Dwayne's presentation, that we're doing it to the utmost standard in any apartment, but especially around kids. So we're going to create a dedicated, accountable team to manage the CU6 apartment. When I say CU6, I'm referring to children under 6, to manage the apartments in this program to ensure that we are on our best practices when we are doing construction work around kids. Third, we're going to check for lead hazards more often. Right now, under the city and federal rules, NYCHA comes into an apartment once per year to check to see if paint is peeling or flaking. We're going to double that. We're going to start doing visual assessments twice per year, so every 6 months. Sorry for the background noise. And that will make us lead to better management of paint and preventing lead hazards in our apartments. Fourth, we're going to do something that we've never done before, which is offer temporary relocation during repair work when it's in critical areas, such as bathrooms, bedrooms, and kitchens. In the past, families just remained in place. Now we are going to make an offer to families to be able to get a hotel for a couple nights. So while we complete the repairs, you'll be in the hotel. We'll make the apartment nice and safe, and then you can return when all the work is done. And this is the first time we've ever tried to do this, and we're really excited about this. Fifth, we're going to keep a heck of a lot better track of where our kids are. One of the things that I've learned over the past 2 years is that it's really hard to track kids across the 160,000 apartments, 165,000 apartments that NYCHA has in its portfolio. And we need to do a better job of that. We need to know where our kids are in order to protect them. And we're going to talk tonight about how we're going to do that. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, before I get too far down the road of lead, I need to begin tonight with just some simple definitions that I might be referencing throughout my presentation. Because, folks sometimes say I give them a headache when I talk about lead. We work on this stuff every day here. But I know that not everybody does. So let me start with this 4 basic terms. Some of you may know what it means, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So the first is the term abatement. So abatement means the permanent removal of lead-based paint from an apartment. So typically we do abatement by either taking out the component, which we'll talk about in a moment, that has lead-based paint. So let's say the lead-based paint is on a shelf. We can just take out that shelf and remove it and put a new shelf in. Or we do it through what we call chemical paint peeling, which basically is applying a substance to the paint, which makes it come off. And we follow, let's say, work practices and abatement protocols to do that, using certified workers and established protocols. So the next is remediation, a little bit different than abatement. So remediation is the practice of fixing damaged paint using special work practices. Another really important strategy for mitigating the harm of lead-based paint. And it's actually pretty simple. What you need to do is you need to make sure that you're using like a wet scraping, so you're not creating dust. You're putting down a containment, like so plastic sheeting, and that you're painting over the area to make it smooth and not peeling. And then making sure that you're taking a dust wipe to test that area after you do the work. So that's remediation. A similar term is the term RRP. So RRP stands for the Renovation, Repair, and Painting Law. And what that law means is that whenever you do work that disturbs lead-based paint, you could be fixing a wall for whatever reason. You need to follow lead-safe work practices. And RRP is a federal law. It's one of the laws that NYCHA wasn't following too good a few years ago. But through the federal agreement, we've now been really much more on top of our compliance with this important law. The fourth term I want to get everybody on the same page with is the word component. And it's a really simple term, but it's a really important term to understand how we're making our lead policies these days. So component is simply a part of your apartment. A component can be a wall, a pipe, a windowsill, a baseboard, a shelf, etc. I can go on and on all night. There's hundreds of individual components that make up our apartment. And all those individual components, if they're painted, they need to be assessed for lead-based paint. Okay, so what we were talking about is components. So a really important concept to understand for lead-based paint is when we say an apartment has lead-based paint, that doesn't mean that every single component in the apartment has lead-based paint. What it means is that certain components in the apartment have lead-based paint. And so some of our apartments, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, have more components than others. In fact, most of our apartments have only one or two components that are actually positive. And they are components that you may never have heard of. For example, there's 5 of them on this map of an apartment. This is a NYCHA apartment. And you see on the left, we have a term called the tub waste. So some apartments have this little piece of equipment that's right by the bathtub drain that helps the bathtub drain. Well, for whatever reason, that component sometimes has lead-based paint on it. The other one is a door buck. So a door buck is just the framing around a door. And door bucks are another component that you might not have heard a lot about, but they have lead-based paint. Another one is a corner case. I myself am not really sure how to explain this one, other than it's really a metal protective barrier around corners of homes that might be there. Same as the chair rail. You see that bump out, that little bump out. Those are in bathrooms. And then finally, you have the lead bend, which is actually not called a lead bend because it has lead-based paint, but that component has over the years, for whatever reason, tested positive as having lead-based paint. Now, these are not the only components, so I just want to be clear about that. Some of our developments have lead paint on the walls. Some have lead paint on like baseboards, window casings, or the windowsills. But every development is different, and every apartment is different, to be quite frank. So that's why we've been actually testing all of our apartments over the past 2 years. You may have heard about it. It's called the XRF initiative. XRF is a fancy piece of equipment that trained technicians use to test for lead. So we've actually been testing 134,000 apartments, and now we're starting to really know. We're about 65% of the way done, give or take. We're starting to really know exactly where in your apartment there is lead-based paint. And that's really going to help us manage lead-based paint a lot better as we talk about the Tempo program. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about, the first of the 5 strategies, is the Tempo abatement program. So I want to be clear at the outset here. Under our agreement that we signed with the federal government, NYCHA needs to abate all of our apartments from lead-based paint. But we need to start somewhere. This is a big project, and so we need to start somewhere. And so we're going to start with apartments with children under 6. And within the child under 6 apartments, we're going to start with apartments that have 2 or fewer components. So remember, I just showed you what a component was, but we're starting with this universe for a couple different reasons. Number one is I'll show you in a moment. This is usually the majority of our apartments have one or two components, so it's our largest group. Second, I'm using the term capacity building, but basically what that means is sometimes NYCHA bites off more than it can chew, and you got to learn how to walk before you can run, kind of thing. Well, what we need to do for capacity building is NYCHA is now going to be doing more abatement than ever before, so we really want to make sure that we can do it well. And the 1 and 2 component apartments are a little bit more straightforward in terms of abatement and in terms of what we need to do with residents for relocation. So we're going to start with that group, because from that, we're going to learn a heck of a lot of how to do more and more complicated apartments. Also, thirdly, 1 or 2 component apartments can usually be done pretty quickly, so 1 or 2 days. So these are going to be hopefully fast, efficient projects that we're going to get a lot of lead out of a lot of apartments quickly. So this is what we're going to do. And so what we're going to have is our tempo abatement program. And that's going to be if you have a child under 6 or 2 or fewer components. And we're going to complete all those abatement activities by October 31st, 2022. And what we'll talk about in a moment is, again, you're not going to have to wait to learn about if your apartment is going to be abated after that. We're going to be coming up with new plans by the end of this year for other apartments as well. But this is where we're starting. So we can go to the next slide. So what this chart here is, it's a pie chart of our XRF results that we received today. So XRF results are lead testing results. So if you add up these numbers, it's going to add up to close to about 65,000 apartments, or it should. This is interesting information to know if you've been following along this XRF initiative. So 65% of the apartments that we tested, or about 43,000 apartments so far, have tested negative, meaning they have no lead-based paint in them that meet the federal standard of 1.0. For other apartments, we have 1 component that's positive above that federal standard, and that is at 17%. So it's about 11,000 apartments. Again, then about 7%, or about 5,000 apartments, have 2 components. So it's in that universe of the green and the yellow that we're going to be, that's where if you have a child under 6 in that universe, we're going to be abating your apartment before October 31st, 2022. The other apartments we're going to talk about, though, we have a plan for as well, which are apartments with 3 or more components. You'll see there's fewer of them, but these are really important apartments because, quite frankly, there's more lead. And so it's these apartments that we need to be very, very careful when we're doing our work in, which leads me to the next slide, which is the tempo repair program. So maybe we'll back one. Oh, there we are. Okay, so tempo repair, really important. So as I said, I use that term RRP. So for the past couple of years, NYCHA has been training thousands of our workers on RRP practices, getting them certified. We've also been really monitoring our compliance with RRP. But quite frankly, we still have a ways to go before we're doing this correctly. And when we're doing this work around kids, there really is no margin for error. We need to be doing better, quicker. So what we're going to do is, instead of having these types of projects assigned to any NYCHA staff member throughout the portfolio, we're going to create a specialized team to work on these apartments, which we're going to call our tempo repair team. And so what this team will do is they're going to be a team of skilled trades that is going to only work on these apartments to make sure that that we are adhering to all lead safe work practices at all times. And so what's the advantage of managing these apartments as what we call an owner group? Oh, just go back, please. Thank you. So the advantage is, number one, it lets us better plan for the work. When we have a smaller group of apartments, we can be really more careful in how we plan the work. And one of the key planning aspects here, which I'll talk about in a moment, is relocation, which is going to be optional, but it's going to take a lot of planning. In addition, it's more accountability. That term is used a lot now, and it's really important at NYCHA that our staff at all levels is held accountable to make sure that we're following these. And when we're dealing with a defined group of staff in a defined group of apartments, accountability will be more achievable than a broader portfolio with a larger pool of workers. So we're going to have our specialized team. In fact, just yesterday, and then tomorrow again. I'm actually in training with these teams to make sure they understand the mission of protecting kids and to make sure that they understand the protocols that they need to use when they're doing work in these apartments. Finally, the third factor that I think is really important for tempo repair, and the reason why we almost chose the term tempo, is we want to be more efficient and better planned when we do our work. You know, some of the horror stories that we've heard about NYCHA and lead paint, and just in news articles over the past few years, is like unfinished construction work. And when we have unfinished construction work in apartments, it gets dusty. It's not good. I've had construction work done on my own where I live, and you know, you see a lot of dust, and it's not good. It's not a good environment for kids who are under the age of 6 or anybody to really be in. And what tempo repair is going to hopefully do is going to be able to create more efficient repairs from trade to trade to trade. So from plasterer to painter and down the line, to make sure that that the work is happening efficiently and there are not those big gaps between the stages of the work. So by doing work with this more defined team, by doing work in more synchronized way, we hope that we're going to be protecting kids better when we're doing this type of paint disturbing work. So that's tempo repair. Next slide, please. Okay, so the other thing that we're going to be doing with the tempo program are more visual assessments. And I mentioned this in the beginning of our presentation, but if you see the bottom right-hand side of this slide here, you see what we're talking about in terms of really a bad condition. And unfortunately, we see this condition in too many NYCHA apartments. What you see in that bottom picture is peeling paint. You see what they call as alligatoring, which is when the paint kind of bubbles. You see cracked paint, and that's a hazard. So we need to, that's the kind of condition that we need to prevent all the time in apartments with child under 6 to make sure that kids are not exposed to that hazard. So what we're going to be doing now is, instead of just coming in once per year, we need to come in twice per year. And I think there's a very good reason for that in NYCHA, because, you know, through my other work in the agency, I run a complaint forum, I work on mold issues. You know, we see other issues such as mold and leaks and other sort of damage to apartments, damage to walls. Well, all that stuff can damage lead-based paint. And so we need to be in apartments more frequently, twice per year, checking these most sensitive apartments to make sure that if there is peeling paint, we're correcting it expeditiously, not waiting for a long time to check again. So every 6 months now, trained personnel are going to conduct a surface-by-surface assessment of any positive or presumed lead-based paint components. And if there's peeling or flaking paint, a work order will be created to paint that area and to make sure that it's safe. And our goal is to complete that work in 21 days after the inspection. So this is our tempo visual assessment program, and it's really tied to tempo repair. They're really kind of like two sides of the same coin, but that's going to be hopefully, again, about reducing risk in our apartments. So next slide, please. So tempo relocation. So, you know, I've told this story a few times on these presentations, but a couple of years ago, I was in a city council hearing about lead, and we were asked by a city council member, you know, if we relocated people during repairs or abatement, and I had to answer honestly. I had to say no. And then the city council member asked a very simple question: is, do you offer relocation to families? Do you give them the option? And back then we did not. So that's going to change with the tempo program. So what we're going to do is create some options for families if they do not want to stay in an apartment, if work is being done in a kitchen and bathroom and bedroom, and we can't give safe access. So for example, if we're doing repairs in a bathroom and the work is not done, we want to give you an option now to get a hotel for hopefully 1, 2, maybe 3 nights while we complete the work and get the unit safe, have it pass the final clearance or dust wipe test, and then have you come back afterwards. So it's going to be an optional program. If a family does not decide to move, we'll be using some protective measures from the health code. But obviously the best option, the most protective option, is to not be there when the work is occurring and to take your family and to go to a hotel for a couple nights and then come back when the work is done. So this will be starting in May. And so it's going to apply if we're doing the work in the kitchen, bedroom, or bathroom of a tempo unit. And we will work with the family in advance of the repairs. And so this is going to take some planning, but we don't want to have this to be rushed. We want to work with you in advance. That's where tempo comes in again. We want to be more in sync with your family to work with you on a date to do the work. We'll get you set up in the hotel, and then you'll be able to go. We'll also be looking at things like meal vouchers, because perhaps we'll be doing work in the kitchen, and maybe you don't want to go to a hotel, but we want to keep you out of your kitchen for that evening. So we'll be working on those things as well. The goal ultimately is to keep your family out of the work areas until the work is done, because that will be better for your child's health. So as I said, the length of relocation is expected to be short. It's going to be mainly hotel-based, and it's expected to be just a couple of days. Some projects obviously could be more extensive and could be longer, and we would talk with individual families about options in those cases. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the other fifth strategy, which I'm kind of calling open enrollment. But basically, the thing that's important to understand about kids under 6 is it changes, right? So first of all, kids grow up and they are no longer in this category. Second of all, new kids get born, and all of a sudden we have a new apartment with a child under 6. Even more harder to keep track of than that is sometimes like a family member might move in with another family member, or maybe a family gets married and maybe mom brings her son or her daughter with her into the household. Well, that's all new kids arriving in our apartments. And honestly, it's really hard to keep track of. And we need to do a better job of it, because again, we don't know where kids are. We can't protect them. We can't get these programs in place. So what Tempo is going to do, number one, is we're going to update our population of apartments every 2 months. So we're starting with our initial population in May, but we're going to be doing some work over the next few months. We're actually going to be doing some door knocking starting next week, likely, to identify some more kids if we haven't heard from your family in a while, to make sure that we're capturing kids. And what we're going to be doing then is updating the list of apartments that are in the Tempo program every 2 months, so that if you didn't tell us about a kid, or you didn't have a kid in your apartment that was in May, but now you have a kid, we want to get you enrolled in the program. Importantly also, it's not just if a child comes to live in your apartment, it's also if they come to visit 10 or more hours per week. So maybe with school starting again, and maybe with back to work again, maybe a son or daughter will be spending time at grandma or grandpa's during the week. If that's 10 or more hours, you should let NYCHA know, because you're eligible to be in the Tempo program. So we want to make sure that we're being protective, and that we're including all of these households. And that's why we're going to update this every 2 months. If you want to update your own household composition, or I should note, this came out of the last town hall, if you want to check on the lead status of your apartment, you should be checking in the NYCHA self-service portal, where you can let us know about if you have a child under 6, where you could also look at important documents on the lead status of your apartment, because that's a really important thing to know. And that should be in your self-service portal. And if you can't find it in there, we'll show you an email address at the end who you can contact, and we'll make sure you get that information if you don't know how to find it. You can also visit your property management office and let them know that you have a kid that's under 6, or a child under 6, so that we can make sure that they get the record and get you included in this program. So next slide. Okay, so some important dates, some of which have already passed. So in April, we sent out our initial letters to the Tempo families, families who are going to get scheduled for abatement. The two or fewer component households, they'll get an abatement letter, and families who are in the repair program will get the repair letter. So those letters were sent out about 2 weeks ago. So you should have received yours already. If you haven't, and you think that you're eligible for this program or should be in it, please email the email address that we'll show at the end, so that you can get that information for your family. Next week, as I mentioned, we're going to start door-to-door outreach, families who we haven't heard from. As you might know, every year we send out a mailer to families to have you let us know if you have a child under 6 or a child under 11 for window guards, which are also important. But what we're going to be doing, though, if we haven't heard from you, we're going to be doing door-to-door outreach to make sure that we know if you've had a kid. So we'll be starting that next week, and it will last for about 5 or 6 weeks. May 15th is the start of the Tempo program. It's not going to be a major change if you're in the program in terms of your life, or at least in a negative way. You're not going to have to do anything. It's not going to be some big new change of your life. What it is like what you're going to see is, number one, you're going to get more frequent visual assessments. Number two, if we're doing work in your apartment, we might offer you relocation. And number three, if you're in the abatement program, you're going to get contacted about scheduling abatement. And I want to make just a mention of that. I know in the time of COVID, folks are worried about people entering their apartment. I know that sometimes when NYCHA wants to do work that's not scheduled or that maybe you didn't ask for, it's not the most popular, but abatement is really important because we will never get to our end goal of removing lead from our apartments if you don't let us come in and do the abatement. So if we get contacted by abatement, I strongly encourage you to work with that team to make sure you schedule those dates. July 2021 is going to be the first refresh of our tempo population. So what that means in plain language is that any CU6 or any family that lets us know that they have a child in May and June, we're going to be adding them to the tempo program in July. And then in the same thing, if you let us know that you have a kid in August or September, in July or August, you get added in September. So we're going to make sure we're refreshing every 2 months to keep this population of apartments fresh. And then December 2021, as I mentioned, abatement, this is just the beginning. So by the end of the year, we're committed to, in our action plan, to announce the next group of abatements. So we need to start looking at the data and see where that makes sense. And by the end of the year, we're going to be announcing our next tranche of abatements. But this is how we get lead out of NYCHA, or at least the first step. And I know, again, this is a long journey. Lead is a huge anxiety factor in people's lives, especially if you have kids. And we want to make sure that number one, that you're taken care of, and that we can turn the corner here. I also want to note, because this came up in our last town hall, this tempo is a program for children under 6, but we need to do better with lead overall. So we need to be following our lead requirements for all of our apartments, and we need to be doing better jobs at doing that as well. And our action plan talks to all of our apartments and how we're going to improve that. But tempo is, again, a program about protecting kids, and we think it's going to hopefully be successful at doing that. So thank you, everybody, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions.